You're listening to the Art Said podcast, episode 8, SEL, Adventures in Alphabet Soup. Welcome to the Art Said podcast, conversations through the perspective of the arts and education, hosted by educators and artists Shauna Longo and Edric DeBose. Hey, Edric, how are we doing today?
I'm good. I'm good.
Always
That's
good to be back recording our next episode.
There it is.
So, after we talked with Cindy Ingram in our last episode, Edric and I decided that our next conversation would center around social emotional learning through the arts. And y'all know our perspectives on the alphabet soup of education. So, we had to throw that little fun in the title there. So, what are you thinking, Edric?
Well, this alphabet soup is something you have to find a way to work your way through. So it's adventures in alphabet soup. Again, you take it apart. So in the same way you're talking about integrating different subject areas in teaching, you have to integrate different alphabet soup combinations, realizing there's probably a connection there. There's probably a layover somewhere that makes it simpler to apply and to think about. But so with Cindy, I want to just give context for what I think she's doing that's unique or original. So basically, in terms of art education, the visual arts, because she's really focusing on visual arts. In terms of the art standards, right, which came along in the 80s sometime, 60% of what they focused on was production. The other 40% was history, criticism, aesthetics, right? Those were the standards, and that's kind of how it was set up. Now, when you look at the new national standards, what they're talking about is four categories, right? Four broad categories into which all the standards fit. Creation, production, connecting, and responding. Now, she's really focusing on connecting, which I think is great because usually, even with the old standards, most of it was production, a little bit of history, maybe some criticism. Nobody
It
really.
was the old standards were very much skill driven. You need to know this, you need to be able to do this very specific versus this more worldly, how can we make connections? How can we think broader, bigger um towards where we're going? And it's thrown a lot of teachers off. Like a
Yeah,
lot of teachers don't get still. I mean, these were done in oh my gosh, when did these come out? 20
80s basically.
no, the new ones, the new
Other-
national ones, I think were like 2016 or something. Um, so like they're not that new, but they're not that old, but there are still people struggling to wrap their heads around them.
well, here's the problem with the fact that again, they're coming from their own experiences and how they were taught, and
Absolutely.
you don't realize you have to change the way you were taught. The way you were taught does not fit for what's coming.
Well, I also think that they really separate themselves as drawing the line in the sand that standards are different than a curriculum, which is different than your lesson plans. And a lot of people don't understand that those are very different silos that you may need stuff from each of them, right? To build your
Yeah.
alphabet soup, but like their function, their form and function is different.
Mhm. So what I think is unique about what Cindy's doing is her experience with connection through an identity through art. That I think is really, really special. I think she understood that that's kind of her superpower and her thing. I think it's very powerful the experience she talked about of standing in front of the Picasso painting. And she said that she walked into this museum, saw the Picasso, and stood there for like about 10 minutes. She went there with her husband. Her husband goes around, he's looking at everything else in the gallery, comes, she's still there in front of that one painting, having this intense connection experience, which I get because I had a similar experience with a piece by Matisse. I
Mhm.
stood there for 2 minutes and I couldn't move, and I realized at that point that I needed to make art, that because at that point I was doing retail sales in a mall somewhere,
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
And it was like, "No, no, you're an artist, dude. This is what." So, but to understand that there was something about connection and identity and reflection that she understood that was really, really, really powerful, and she had this intuition that her emotional connection was a higher level experience, right? And that was really the point. And so, all this stuff about art history and technique really prevents you from having that more direct emotional experience. I mean, because if you read art history, they say things like, and when the viewer is standing in front of the piece, one feels a sense of, it's like, so you think you're supposed to feel all this stuff that the writer's telling you. It's like, no, what is the direct experience you're having? And then how does that relate to your own personal emotional history? That I think was her breakthrough. And then also her belief that art is really an experience that changes you and changes over time. You'll return back to that same painting years later. You'll get something really different from it, depending on what you're going through and what your life is going through. So art changes over time. That song you listen to that you're in love with, it changes over the years. You have a different relationship to it. So art is really about an experience. It's not just a document for consumption, right? And
Right.
that relates to, you think about Bloom's taxonomy, synthesis, right? In terms of cognitive domain, it's really synthesis. You're putting structure, or putting together a pattern from diverse elements. So you're taking different parts and bringing those parts together to create a new meaning, right? And that's a higher level skill. So um, again, just to locate, I'm saying what she's doing within the teaching of arts. So when you look at Bloom's taxonomy, again, there are three domains, right? The cognitive domain, the affective domain, which is really emotion based, and the psychomotor, which is more action based, right? But looking at the affective domain, you think about, there's receiving, responding, which just means you're experiencing it, you're responding to it, and then valuing, organizing. And what I thought was interesting is the fifth in Bloom's taxonomy is characterizing. So you're really talking about character, right? You're
Mhm.
characterizing, and you can do that subjectively based on your experiences, what you've seen and how that's reflected in what's coming back to you as you're experiencing things. And just last, what she said, I think is again interesting, is the focusing on modern art, right? So we're calling it, it's 100 years old. We're calling it modern art, right?
I know, I know.
So, but early, you think about early modernism. We can't get rid of the term. So, but you think about what happened in early modernism is the work starts to become more subjective. I think about like Picasso, and Picasso, because she had an experience with the Picasso painting by a girl standing in front of a mirror, and what that means about this young woman reflecting on who she is. Or Picasso's guitar player, which is again iconic. A lot of people know it. It's sad. It's talking about sadness. And then you have things like expressionism, where now you're talking about anxiety, emotions, or surrealism, where you're talking about the psychological aspect. So she recommends looking at more contemporary art to use as a catalyst for instruction and bringing other students into the experience of thinking about, well, how does this pull something out of my experience when I look at this particular piece? Or even like, but I think as time moves on, so you think about romanticism in music, right? Which is what
Right.
a lot of film scores sound like, the romantic period. But it's
Absolutely.
really about the emotions. And that's why it's really about how something feels as opposed to structure and harmony and theory, right? So
Absolutely. And I want to break down this idea of the Bloom's taxonomy and three domains of learning, because some people may be like, wait a second, there's more to Bloom's taxonomy. This is the three domains of learning are the overarching pieces of the blooms that we readily talk about with the remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. It's how those get broken down into broader categories that put it into these domains. So just so everybody listening doesn't like, they're talking about the wrong blooms. No, no, no. We're going deeper dive into blooms than the surface that we typically talk about within education, um, in reference to blooms and the cognitive demand, right? How hard our students' brains are working. Well, these three levels are really like how is your brain working emotionally based, action based, or knowledge based? That's those kind of three domains of cognitive, affective, and psychomotor. So just to kind of dive into that a little bit more to kind of give you guys perspective for anyone that's like, wait, hold up, they're not right.
and this is what it's like to swim in the alphabet soup.
Yes, 100%. But when we're talking about that um, affective domain, right? That emotion based, that's really where the SEL falls in. And so you may be wondering, there may be people listening that don't really know what SEL or social emotional learning is. And so, as defined by Castle, and they revised this is the new 2020 definition, even though we're 3 years later, but it is the process through which all young people and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to develop healthy identities, manage emotions and achieve personal and collective goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain supportive relationships, and make responsible and caring decisions. And so I think it's really important that not only is SEL about the students, but right there in the definition, it says and adults. And
Very important.
so we need to understand that all of our efforts within education towards bringing SEL into the classroom, if nobody's doing anything with the adults, with the teachers, it's probably not going to have the intended effect that people would like it to have, because we as educators come into the classroom with baggage. We have our own things going on in our own lives, in the classroom, outside of the classroom, within the school, outside of the school. And so we also need to be able to manage our emotions, right? To achieve personal and collective goals, to show, we need to feel and show empathy for others, our colleagues, our administrators, our students. We need to establish and maintain supportive relationships of each other, for and of each other. And we need to make responsible, caring decisions on the fly. We make a million decisions a day. And so I don't think a lot of people look at this definition through the adult side of it and really break down and think about how much of this really does apply to the teachers in the classroom. It's like that unspoken thing that really people need to talk about more.
Right. So yeah, again, you come from your own experiences. This is what we said before. You were educated in a particular kind of way, so therefore that education you had might be affecting how it is you're teaching. But you need to understand that you have to change the way you teach. Again, that's a huge one.
Yeah.
You have to change your approach because it doesn't really work for where kids are going in the future and where they're going to wind up. So the SEL for teachers, I mean, it's like, well, how do you feel about the way you teach? How do you feel about the students you teach? You have to keep going through that. I think about I had when I first started subbing. That's when I first it really hit me. I remember getting really upset with this kid, and when I thought about it later, I was like, I'm a grown man. How am I getting so upset with a 12-year-old kid? And I realized he reminded me of a kid in 7th grade.
Yeah.
And I still had and I realized if I can't get past this, I can't actually help this kid. If I
Right.
if I stay
You
mad
can't
at
let your own emotions get in the way of meeting the kids' needs.
right, absolutely. And I think that happens a lot. I think that goes on in many
Oh,
places.
way too often. And I don't think people take the time to figure out the why this kid gets under their skin or why they can't connect with this student. Um, that it's hard to unpack all of that. There's emotional baggage.
Right. So SEL again, that's just to restate it, does apply
Yeah.
to adults. I was
Yes.
gonna bring something really quick. So SEL became more well known as a result of two books. Became popular in the culture. One of them was emotional IQ, and the other was emotional intelligence. And so when they hit, and it was like in the '90s somewhere, they were big, the bestsellers. And that language of the importance of emotional intelligence started to really become more well known. So also Adam Grant, watching Adam Grant, he's a great organizational psychologist, great great videos, great books. Anyway, he talked about this interesting experiment where they were looking at what constituted success for a particular a group of people, students they were watching. What he found out in going through the research and looking at the backgrounds was one of the most important things was what they learned in kindergarten, the quality of their kindergarten teacher, because what they were learning was character. They were learning things like discipline, persistence. What do you do when you run into a problem you haven't seen before? You know, how do you overcome those things? And those kids that had those skills tended to do better and tended to make more money and to be more successful in that sense
Mhm.
later on. Same thing with another experiment he mentioned with two sets of entrepreneurs. And they went through a week-long training, and one of them focused on the hard skills, finance, employees, taxes, business plan, cost ratio, and the other they focused on things like the so-called soft skills.
Mhm.
What are the incentives? How are you going to incentivize your employees? How are
Right.
you going to connect with their concerns? Um, how are you going to handle a problem you've never seen before? you know and again, within, I think it was something like a year 2 years later, the soft skills people were doing better. And so it's not even like, it's just these skills are critically important to where we're going. I think.
Well, absolutely, and really, soft skills has been rebranded as social emotional learning in a
Yes.
way, right? Um, and it's that whole thing where we're preparing students for careers that don't exist yet. So if we can't give them the specific skills, they're going to need to do a specific job because it doesn't exist in the world yet. We've got to equip them with skills that will apply no matter what job they choose, what career path they choose. And those are those social emotional based skills. So within a school setting, SEL really is a process. It's an educational process through which skills for life effectiveness are intentionally taught and modeled in a safe, supportive, and culturally responsive environment. And so it's important to know that they are intentionally taught, and oh yeah, these happen, we're doing them. Yeah, but how are you doing them? In what way are you doing them? And I think that a lot of things we do from the alphabet soup of education, but maybe not with an intentionality. And are we modeling them for our students? Are they seeing us persevere? Are they seeing us having grit and determination? And are they seeing us having good relationships in working with our colleagues? And so when we talk specifically about the arts are very social. We create, perform, we present together. The arts are very emotional. We have a reaction to pieces, whether they be in any of the arts realms, right? Not just visual art or music, but dance, theater, putting yourself into your work. So the arts are essentially, in their essence, very social and emotional. And so with the work of Castle, there are 5 core competencies for social emotional learning in case you're not aware of them, and they fall under like 3 categories, right? So the first is self, and that's your self-awareness and self-management. And that has shifted to more of the thought of what is our identity? Who are you? What is our resilience? Are we aware of our strengths and our needs? And is everyone welcome in our space? This is our who we are. The second category is others, and that's the sense of belonging, our relationship skills, our social awareness. Are we celebrating cultural assets and representation of different students and people within our schools and our community? Are we bringing out each student's superpower, as I sometimes like to call them? What are they bringing to the classroom that we can harness and have them connect with their learning more? And there's a little bit of vulnerability in this realm of social emotional learning. And you want to think about like, how can I benefit the group? Because it's all about others, belonging and working with others. And then the last one is decisions. This is what gives our students agency because they're in making responsible decisions where we're embracing diversity, we're amplifying student voices, and engagement in the classroom is now leveled up to empowerment. We want to empower our students to learn, to move forward, to become productive citizens within our schools. And so, in the arts realm, Dr. Scott Edgar is not only a friend of mine, I'm going to name drop there, but he also is one of the big powerhouses of social emotional learning around the world. And so I recently heard him speak, and he said to find joy, inspiration, peace, intellectual stimulation, meaning, and other life enhancing qualities through participation in the arts. And the other thing he said was to collaborate and connect with others in an enjoyable, inclusive environment as students create, prepare, connect, and share artwork that brings communities together. So I think those are really important when we start to kind of think about how that alphabet soup and making this have a little bit more meaning and dig in a little bit to the social emotional learning side of education and what we can do in our classrooms.
Yeah, so intentionality is always is kind of sits at the bottom of all this. Like, what is your intent? I was reading an article recently, and this one teacher was talking about how you listen to a podcast like this, you listen to people talk about what should it, and you start to feel like, man, I'm not doing enough.
Yeah.
But I think the point is to look at as much as you can, and then find something you can just start to incorporate. Just find a piece of something that you can apply. Uh, that gives you a sense of, yeah, I'm moving in the right direction. I'm doing the right thing. It's funny because I recently ran into a student I hadn't seen for years. Like, he graduated like 10 years ago, and
Oh,
he told me
geez.
a story about this experience in class where he I said, "Are you going to finish your painting?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm really not feeling it today." And I said, "You can't quit before you start." I said, "That's not even a thing." And he told me the story. I didn't even remember it, but and then he said he uses that though when he has to practice guitar because he's a musician. This is a lesson he learned in art class. He's applying to what he's doing professionally. And he said, "I can't." So I have to start rehearsing and practicing whether I feel like it or not. Once I start, if I decide to quit, well, then that's okay. But I
Yeah,
have to at least start and begin. So you have these lessons that from one realm that kind of do apply. And I think that's just one of the possibilities with the arts. But again, I just think it's like yeah, you're swimming in alphabet soup. It's like, find something that you can grab onto that makes sense, incorporate it. There's already a connection probably to what you're doing, but it's like it's really about updating the level of intentionality. I mean,
absolutely. Yeah,
that,
and you don't need 100 life vests to save yourself. You just need one, right? You need one little thing. Start small, and then when that works, add something else. And that's how you kind of progress through this. And it's not always going to go well. Like there's going to be epic fails and that's okay too. It's how you proceed forward out of something not going the way you anticipated or not going well in the classroom or in whatever capacity. Um, that really matters. And that brings back that like SEL for the teachers, right? It's okay. We have to be vulnerable in trying new things and knowing that they may not work. They may work right now. They may not work tomorrow. They may not work in an hour with a different set of kids, but you still have to try.
Yeah, and that's for me one of the main lessons of art. I mean, even with my kids, I mean, they'll start on a drawing, it'll look good, and then they get scared, like, oh, I'm gonna mess it up, and
Yes,
yeah, you're gonna mess it up. It's true. So,
it's
but
okay. That's what
you
this is
gotta
for.
keep going. It's like
And that's
that's
why we make erasers or another piece of paper.
or that's why you take 1,000 foul shots. It's like, yeah,
Right.
you're gonna miss a bunch of shots. You're gonna miss a bunch,
Absolutely.
you know.
Absolutely. So to wrap this episode up, some thoughts from Cindy's book kind of to bring it all together. One, art, it's not an out of body experience, it's a full body one. And so tapping into that emotional side is really important to that. The arts also give us a sense of belonging. In some capacity, everybody can find a connection to that.
Short story about belonging though. So John was talking to one of the teachers I work with was talking to the nurse at the school, and he said we was talking about teen arts, the teen
Yeah.
arts.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And she went to teen arts when she was in high school. And she said, "Oh yeah, I went to when I was in high school. I went to teen arts." She said it was a life changing experience. And I'm like, I know. She said she became a nurse, but I think what it was to when you're suddenly in a place where you're around a bunch of other art kids or a bunch of
Hmm.
other music kids, and you realize, oh, these are my people, this is my place. I mean,
Yes.
I think about this one student that named me as her teacher of influence. She talked about how in seventh grade, the art club after school was her place, her safe place. She felt comfortable in school because she had this place where she can go and make art. So anyway, all those are pieces of what how the arts create a possibility for SEL.
Absolutely. Another quote from Cindy was, when the artwork leaves the artist's hands, it becomes the viewer's. It is a gift from the artist to the viewer. Art is pure connection from the artist to the viewer, from the viewer to themselves. And we could shift the words in that around to be any form of arts, right? From the musician to the listener, et cetera, et cetera. That it really is all about pure connection. And that's what we need to lean on. That's the SEL side of the arts. It's making that connection.
I think also it's important to talk about how teaching is an art form. It's like
Yes.
not everybody can do this.
No, they can't. That's for sure. Some still try.
Yeah.
And there are some parts of it that, like, you just got there's something in you, right? That you can't take someone that it's not for them and mold them into this fantastic teacher. There's just this something that you need to innately just have in you.
Yeah, and let it come out. I mean, so I
Yeah.
think that's again, I appreciate Cindy for what she did, having this realization of this is important. This connection thing is really the main point I want to focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then we'll leave you with two final nuggets. One, healing and growth are part of connection and creating. And experiencing art changes you, and the art changes or evolves with you. And that goes for all art forms.
So if you read Cindy's book, one of the things that because I thought it was very brave, she really talked about artwork and she really just talked about got very personal in
Yeah.
terms of her life and some of the things she went through and how this reflection upon the art helped her to reflect upon her own life and look at some of the things that she needed to deal with or overcome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. Well, thanks for joining us on another episode. We will see you on the flip side in our next episode. Have a great day.
Thank you. Take care.